Russia has denied U.S. media reports that President Trump has disclosed classified intelligence to Russian officials, implying that American media should not be trusted. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says that people should not read American newspapers because they can be harmful and even dangerous. Earlier this week, media said that during an Oval Office meeting, Trump shared classified code word information with Russian officials. The report says the move could put a source of intelligence on Daesh at risk. President Trump has defended his sharing of information with Moscow. In a Twitter message, he said that he wanted to share facts pertaining to terrorism and airline flight safety. He said that he wanted Russia to greatly step up its fight against Daesh.
President Trump's upcoming visit to Israel just got a whole lot more complicated. According to a report published Tuesday by the New York Times, Israel provided the sensitive information Trump reportedly shared with Russian diplomats last week. While the White House contends the information Trump shared during his conversation was wholly appropriate, the Washington Post reported Monday that Trump shared highly classified information without seeking permission from the source.
The premise of that article is false, that in any way the president had a conversation that was inappropriate or that resulted in any kind of lapse in national security.
National Security Advisor Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster said Tuesday that Trump didn't even know the source of the intelligence. The Israeli ambassador to the U.S. wouldn't tell the Times whether Israel was the source. He just reiterated Israel's strong relationship with the U.S. and its full confidence in its intelligence-sharing relationship. But that's not the only thing that could pose problems for Trump on his visit. Israel's Channel 2 reported Monday that members of Trump's advance team got into an argument with their Israeli counterparts over Trump's visit to the Western Wall.
We turn now to Israel, where a diplomatic spat erupted on Monday between U.S. and Israeli officials after an American representative questioned Israel's claim to one of the holiest sites in Judaism. This comes just days before a planned visit by President Donald Trump. And joining me now to weigh in by phone from Jerusalem is our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome to you, Mark. Great to be with you.
Can you give us a quick overview of what happened?
Well, what happened is that the Israeli and the American teams right now, the advanced teams, are going over the details of the visit. Part of the idea is that actually for the first time any sitting U.S. president is planning to go to the wall. That's where President Trump plans to go, to the Western Wall. The Israeli team asked if Netanyahu could join them. They said it's a private visit, according to the American team. And then they asked the Israeli team, can a film crew accompany Trump? And that's when apparently one official said, what are you talking about? It's none of your business. It's not even party responsibility. It's not your territory. It's part of the West Bank. This comes from a report from Channel 2. So that really set off Israelis who know the Western Wall is part of the Temple Mount and part of a 3,000-year history of the Jewish people to Jerusalem, and that upset them quite a bit.
We'll talk a little bit more about the reaction. What has it been like in Jerusalem?
Well, it was a big reaction here. I mean, it's very sensitive to the Israelis, to the Jewish people, and really the controversy centers around Jerusalem and whether or not there is any Jewish connection. There was a UN resolution in December that denied that. That's the Palestinians want that as a future capital. And I think the bigger picture, Mark, is the fact that a lot of Israelis are sensing that the Trump administration is getting closer to the Palestinian Authority and probably putting Jerusalem on the table, and that's a great concern to the Israelis and to the Prime Minister.
All right, it looks like the Trump administration is more divided than ever when it comes to moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Veteran bureaucrats in the State Department, Department of Defense, and intelligence community are issuing stern warnings to the president against the move, according to CNN. At the same time, Trump advisors in the West Wing are imploring him to keep his campaign promise. Many are wondering if the president plans to announce the embassy move when he arrives in Israel next week, or if he'll be the fourth president in a row to backslide on the pledge.
A significant breakthrough toward regional peace might possibly be underway now that some Gulf Arab states are considering forming ties with Israel. According to today's Wall Street Journal, several Arab Gulf nations are willing to improve relations with the Jewish state if Jerusalem makes a major effort to revive the peace process with the Palestinians. This normalization process reportedly includes permission for Israeli planes to enter the Gulf country's airspace, as well as the creation of the interlinking of trade and telecommunication lines. So what's the catch? Well, there are a few, and they're pretty big. Israel would first have to agree to freeze all settlement construction and also ease trade restrictions with the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. By the way, Saudi Arabia tops the itinerary of U.S. President Donald Trump's impending visit to the region, where he's planning to meet with other Arab leaders from neighboring states.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrived in Washington, D.C. for his meeting with Donald Trump. A first for the two presidents, and a difficult one. Topping the agenda, the war in Syria and the fight against terror groups.
We support Turkey in the first fight against terror and terror groups like ISIS and the PKK, and ensure they have no safe quarter.
Notably, one group not mentioned, the YPG. The U.S. had recently agreed to supply additional and new weapons to the group for the fight against Daesh. This move came as a shock to Turkey, as it considers the YPG the Syrian branch of the PKK terror group.
It doesn't matter what country supports the YPG. Any support for terror groups are against international agreements. Let it be known that whichever country lends support to the group considers them as a legitimate party and is violating international agreements.
However, according to Turkish sources, Washington and Ankara are discussing what Turkey views as essential measures for closer cooperation. The U.S. agrees to increase its efforts on gathering intelligence about PKK operations and shares intelligence with Turkey. The U.S. is giving Turkey assurances that Raqqa is going to be governed by locals and Arabs and not by Kurds or the YPG. Finally, the U.S. will not voice any objections over Turkey's demands to clear the northern Iraqi city of Sinjar of any PKK presence.
9 people were injured during a protest outside of the residence of the Turkish ambassador to the U.S. in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. About 12 people showed up to the embassy a few hours after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met with President Donald Trump at the White House, where Trump extended a warm welcome to authoritarian-style leader Erdogan. One protester said they think they can engage in the same sort of suppression of protest and free speech that they engage in Turkey. They stopped us for a few minutes, but we still stayed and continued to protest Erdogan's tyrannical regime. A Facebook video captured at the scene shows several protesters covered in blood.
Speaking to reporters ahead of an emergency UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley left the door open to dialogue with North Korea if it abandoned its nuclear and ballistic missile ambitions. She also raised the possibility of broader sanctions by Washington and vowed to call out states that provide aid to the isolated regime.
And I will tell you that if you are a country that is supplying or supporting North Korea, we will call you out on it. We will make sure that everyone knows who you are, and we will target those sanctions towards you as well. We are willing to talk, but not until we see a total stop of the nuclear process and of any tests there. As you look at this test, Russia should be extremely concerned at the fact that they came within 60 miles of their border. We have often been concerned about South Korea and Japan. We will continue to have their backs. We're going to continue all of our military exercises with South Korea because we think it's important in order to protect them. We're going to continue to have the back of Japan because we think that's important, but we're trying to also have the backs of the region.
The DPRK categorically and totally rejects the UNSC's press statement, which called into question its bolstering of nuclear deterrence for self-defense, pursuant to the US's vicious anti-DPRK policy. Just in recent weeks, the US conducted 2 test fires of intercontinental ballistic missiles, but the UNSC never mentioned them. The right to self-defense is the first criterion of sovereignty. If the US and its followers pick on our self-defensive measures and hustle around, they will only end up in crushing defeat and regret. we will continue to develop highly precise and varied nuclear weapons and nuclear striking measures, and push ahead with any necessary preparations for tests of these weapons until the United States and its followers get the right mind and make the right choice.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has crossed a red line and it's time to assassinate him. Those are the words of an Israeli cabinet minister, and as stunning as they are, they've been prompted by even more shocking reports about atrocities being committed near Damascus. The U.S. State Department is accusing the Assad regime of carrying out mass executions of thousands of prisoners and then disposing their bodies in a huge crematorium. Washington says there's evidence that about 50 detainees are being hanged each day at the Saidnaya military prison, which is just 45 minutes north of the Syrian capital, and their corpses are being burned immediately after. Retired Israeli military general and current housing minister Yoav Gallant acknowledges that targeted political assassinations are considered illegal under international law, and that he's not necessarily speaking about practicalities. But he's drawing a parallel to Nazi Germany, saying this is something the world hasn't witnessed in 70 years. He insists anyone who's conducting directed chemical attacks, mass murder, and the burning of their opponents' corpses no longer has a place in this world. Gallant made the comments while addressing a ground warfare and logistics conference near Jerusalem. He also voiced his belief that the world will wipe out the Islamic State, Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda terror groups because they lack the same level of support as Syria and Hezbollah, which are backed by Iran.
Syria's foreign ministry said today that it categorically denies the U.S. State Department's allegations of not only the mass killings, but then the incineration of these bodies in a crematorium, as you just mentioned, describing the allegations as a quote-unquote new Hollywood plot and lies. Another round of peace talks is underway in Geneva, aimed at ending Syria's long-running civil war. The timing of the accusations could be to pressure Russia, an ally of Assad's regime, to condemn the mass killings and the incineration of the victims' bodies, as we're talking about. And also, John, what U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, describes as, quote, the horrors of the Syrian regime.
Gunmen have stormed a state-run TV and radio station in Afghanistan's east. The attack is happening in the city of Jalalabad in Nangarhar province. You are looking at scenes as the attack began. Shots were fired as security troops engaged in a gunfight with attackers inside the building. 2 attackers blew themselves up while one was shot dead by Afghan National Security Forces.
The World Health Organization has declared a dengue fever epidemic in Piura, a city in the northwest of Peru, after the death toll there climbed to 19. Authorities say 3,150 cases have been confirmed across the country so far, and there are thousands more suspected cases. In the city alone, 300 possible new dengue infections are being reported daily. Heavy rains on the north coast and flash flooding have left puddles of stagnant water along streets and housing areas, creating a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes which spread the virus.
Honduras has transferred hundreds of suspected gang members to a new maximum security prison in a bid to stamp out criminal activity in the country's overcrowded jails. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez said 2,000 prisoners in total are to be transferred to new facilities in the remote La Tolva and El Pozo regions. Prisons in Honduras are notorious hotbeds of gang activity, with drug dealing, violence and escapes common in the country's overcrowded facilities.
The murder of another Mexican journalist known for investigating drugs trafficking prompted a protest in Mexico City on Tuesday. Dozens of journalists and supporters gathered outside the Interior Ministry after Javier Valdez was shot dead in the northern state of Sinaloa on Monday. He was the fifth reporter killed since March in one of the world's deadliest countries for the trade. Fellow journalists criticized the lack of success in bringing perpetrators to justice. Impunity is an invitation to continue killing journalists, she says. It's not that journalists are special people, we're just like any other citizen, but society is closing its eyes and blocking its ears. Amid ongoing bloodshed between drug cartels, Valdez died when gunmen opened fire on his car. On the same day, a local magazine editor in a neighboring state was shot and wounded, and her adult son killed.
2 people have been killed on the 45th day of protest against the government of President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. The 2 men, 18-year-old Luis Alvarez and Diego Hernandez, aged 33, were killed as demonstrators clashed with security forces in the volatile Táchira state, close to the border with Colombia. The nationwide protests show no sign of abating, with as many as 41 fatalities reported and hundreds injured. In the central state of Carabobo, authorities claim 3 policemen had been injured, one of them critically.
EU countries opposed to migrant resettlement quotas have been issued with a warning. The European Commissioner for Migratory Issues has given Poland and Hungary 1 month to comply with the migrant relocation package or face legal action. At the moment, resettlement is way behind target, and some are calling for tough action.
There has to be a legal response by the Commission, which is the guardian of the treaties. So sanctions must be imposed on member states which are simply lacking the political will to abide by the law.
But one Hungarian MEP from Viktor Orbán's party argues relocation is counterproductive. For them, the quota means they're allowed to come, because then they'll be relocated. It's an invitation for those hundreds of thousands of people, and also a chance for human traffickers to carry out more horrific acts, she says. The EU's Migration Commissioner warned Hungary and Poland to comply without naming them.
If no action is taken within 1 month from now, then I will have to move forward by taking I would say legal measures.
But the Commissioner says he's still confident about meeting the target of relocating refugees from Greece and Italy.
Transport and public services across Greece have been severely affected by a general strike. The walkout was called by the country's 2 biggest trade unions over new austerity measures. The industrial action comes a day before Parliament is set to vote on controversial reforms which will cut pensions and end tax breaks. This man said if these measures are passed, things will be very difficult, and the growth they are talking about is not for us or our children, but for the capitalists. This looting of the workers and pensioners has gone on for too long, this woman said. They have taken us to the lowest of levels. Along with hospital services, the nationwide strike has seen metro, ferry and other public transport grind to a halt. The Greek government needs to make more savings before its lenders agree to hand over further loans as part of the country's latest bailout deal.
Ukraine has imposed a ban on Russia's largest social media network and other websites popular with millions. They join a list of around 400 Russian firms to be blacklisted by Kiev since Moscow's annexation of Crimea. The Kremlin has threatened retaliation. It's another step in a chain of many other steps by the Ukrainian authorities which violate the rights of the people to receive information. Kiev said it was imposing the sanctions to guard against cyber attacks.
The government of Egypt is considering extreme new proposals to restrict people's access to social media, stating that reforms were necessary to combat terrorism and incitement against the state. MP Rayad Abdel Sattar is the author of a draft bill circulated in Egyptian newspapers, which would require users to register with the government to access sites including Twitter and Facebook. Unauthorized use of social media could result in prison sentences and heavy fines. Civil society groups are alarmed by the implications of the proposed law. The initiative represents the latest attempt to crack down on social media in Egypt since the overthrow of President Hosni Mubarak, which was dubbed the Facebook Revolution due to organizers' use of the social network.
Thailand is pressuring Facebook to remove more than 130 pages of what Bangkok calls illicit content. The Thai government warned the social media giant that it'll be banned in the country and gave until 10 a.m. Tuesday local time to remove the pages. The controversial legislation makes criticism of the royal family a criminal offense. A few weeks ago, a video that appears to show the country's new king walking through a shopping mall in a crop top was widely shared on the site. However, Facebook and the pages in question remained accessible on Tuesday.
The Trump administration has taken Republicans' global gag rule on abortion and greatly expanded it. More formally known as the Mexico City policy, the rule prevents U.S. funding from going to foreign health providers if they perform or promote abortions. That includes groups that treat malaria, AIDS, the Zika virus, and other conditions unrelated to family planning. If they even give patients information regarding abortions, they could lose U.S. funding. The Obama administration nixed the Mexico City policy in 2009, and President Donald Trump brought it back in January. But Trump has taken it a step further. He added the Department of Defense to the list of agencies whose funding has to adhere to the policy. So while George W. Bush's gag rule affected about $600 million in available funding for those overseas organizations, Trump has expanded it to affect almost $9 billion. Supporters say the law doesn't actually reduce the amount of financial aid going out. It just prevents it from going to organizations that promote abortions.
Tornadoes have hit the central U.S., leaving a trail of destruction across 3 states and up near the Canadian border. Elk City in the state of Oklahoma saw the most damage, causing schools to shut down there. At least 1 person has been killed in Wisconsin, with many houses all across the region destroyed.
A bus driver in Wisconsin is so charismatic, riders notice when he's not at work. One of them asked Tom Redmond where he'd been recently. Redmond said his mother had died. He later saw the same passenger passing something around the bus. It turned out to be a sympathy card that they all signed.
And this is what was inside. My thoughts and prayers for strength and peace bless you. Hope good memories will sustain you and yours during this time. Figured it was a card from him. I had no idea it was a card from everybody, you know. So I was blown away.
Redmond said the simple gesture from strangers has given him the strength to get through.